अगर फिरदौस पर रुए ज़मीं अस्त, हमी अस्तो, हमी अस्तो, हमी अस्त. If there is a heaven on earth, it is here, it is here, it is here. These words of Amir Khusro are said to have been used by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to describe Kashmir. My name is Kabir Bedi, and today on Guns and Glory, we travel to Kashmir to relive the war that has divided this paradise for decades. We go back in time to the year when India awoke to freedom and had to fight its first war with Pakistan over who should have Jammu and Kashmir. On the morning of 27th October 1947, a DC-3 aircraft was approaching Srinagar airport. A handful of worried men waited at the airstrip, desperate for the plane to land. 12 kilometers away, there was palpable fear in the summer capital of Jammu and Kashmir. The day before, the Maharaja had fled the city for the safety of Jammu. The DC-3 aircraft circling Srinagar was piloted by World War II veteran Biju Patnaik. On board the aircraft were 17 soldiers of the 1 Sikh regiment who, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Diwan Ranjit Rai, were rushing to the defense of Kashmir. Biju Patnaik made 2 passes over the airstrip before deciding to land. The instructions from Prime Minister Nehru's office were very clear. Do not land if the airport has been taken by the enemy. At 9:30 a.m., 2 hours after having taken off from Palam Airport in Delhi, the DC-3 aircraft landed in Srinagar. The first 17 soldiers of the Indian Army had arrived to defend Srinagar against the pillaging marauders who had come from Pakistan.
Even though the decision was sudden, it didn't really matter to the army. An army which had fought in the jungles of Burma against the Japanese, in the mountains of Italy and deserts of northwest Africa against Rommel. For it, it had no issue.
At the airstrip, Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai was briefed about the situation by senior Kashmir officials who had been eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Indian Army. Lieutenant Colonel Rai was informed that Baramulla, the second biggest town of Kashmir, 56 kilometers away, was under siege, and the Kashmir state forces were barely managing to hold on. Lieutenant Colonel Rai immediately rushed his men towards Baramulla. But Baramulla had already fallen a day ago into the hands of the raiders. The town had been looted and burnt. Women, irrespective of religion or age, had been raped, and people had been killed in their hundreds.
Instead of advancing straight to Srinagar airport, which they could have easily captured, they halted and indulged in rape and looting in Baramulla. What happened because of that was, that gave that crucial window of opportunity for Indian Army to land in troops in Srinagar.
To stop the raiders moving towards Srinagar, C Company of the 1 Sikh regiment took up a defensive position about 8 kilometers from Baramulla town. In the meantime, another plane brought in the D Company of the 1 Sikh regiment. Lieutenant Colonel Rai ordered a quick flag march through Srinagar town before rushing with his men to join the fight on the road to Baramulla. The flag march restored morale in Srinagar and announced to the people of Kashmir that the Indian Army had arrived to defend them. At the stroke of the midnight hour, on the night of 14-15th August 1947, British India was divided as per the two-nation theory put forward by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Pakistan's founder. The 562 princely states had the choice to either join India or Pakistan or negotiate some new terms with both. Jinnah was both a lawyer and a constitutional expert, and he knew that his two-nation theory did not apply to the princely states. So while overtly he never made any demands for the inclusion of Jammu and Kashmir in Pakistan, he set in motion a chain of events aimed at doing just that. Maharaja Hari Singh, the fourth king of the Dogra dynasty of Jammu and Kashmir, had no intention of joining either India or Pakistan. On the 12th of August 1947, 3 days before India's independence, the Maharaja of Kashmir sent telegrams asking for a standstill agreement to both the dominions of India and Pakistan. Pakistan accepted the agreement on 15th August through a telegraphic communication. India asked for consultations. In the days following 15th August, while Kashmir still remained independent, an important and very popular mass leader of Kashmir secretly went to Lahore to meet Jinnah to discuss the future of Kashmir. Jinnah never met him, saying, "I don't need to meet this man. Kashmir is in my pocket." Sheikh Abdullah left Lahore for Srinagar, a humiliated and disappointed man. 2 months later, when the time came, he backed Maharaja Hari Singh and his decision to accede to India because Pakistan had chosen to use force to grab his beloved Kashmir. On 4th September 1947, the British Chief of Staff of the Jammu and Kashmir State Forces submitted a report stating that armed raiders, mainly of the Rawalpindi district in Pakistan, had infiltrated into the state. The Prime Minister of Kashmir sent a telegram to the Chief Minister of West Punjab in Pakistan requesting him to take prompt action. The Deputy Commissioner of Rawalpindi replied on behalf of the Chief Minister, denying that any raiders had moved into Kashmir. Many more telegrams were exchanged, but Pakistan continued denying all knowledge of any invasion. But we'll come back to that. For now, let's jump ahead to October 28th, when Lieutenant Colonel Diwan Ranjit Rai and his men were all that stood between Pakistan and Srinagar. On 28th October, the raiders began to stream out of Baramulla towards Srinagar. At 9 in the morning, when the first clashes took place, Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai and his men were thoroughly outnumbered. The A and B Company of the 1 Sikh Regiment landed in Srinagar on the 28th afternoon and rushed to the aid of the defenders. By late evening, the situation had become critical for the Indians. The raiders had been beaten back time and again, but they regrouped and launched an all-out attack as the 1 Sikh Regiment made a fighting withdrawal towards Srinagar. Lieutenant Colonel Rai, who was supervising the withdrawal, fell in battle, one of the first martyrs to the war in Kashmir. But his men continued blocking the raiders' advance towards Srinagar for several days, giving the Indian Air Force time to fly in the remaining rifle companies of the 1 Sikh. 3 battalions of the 161 Infantry Brigade, a machine gun company, and an artillery battery. The Indian strength increased just in time to repel a Pathan raiding force that had managed to bypass 1/6 roadblock and had actually reached the boundary of Srinagar airfield. The brigade headquarters was set up at the airfield itself. On November 2nd, Brigadier L.P. Sen, a decorated World War II hero of the former British Indian Army, took command of the Indian forces in the valley. The situation in Srinagar was very fluid and dangerous. About 8,000 raiders, led by Pakistani soldiers, were determined to capture the town. Brigadier Sen divided his men into 2 groups. One group was to defend the Srinagar town and airfield, and with the other, he went to meet the enemy. On November 6th, an aerial reconnaissance showed the enemy digging in and preparing for a prolonged and heavy attack on Srinagar. Brigadier Sen had 2 options: to hold defensive positions and wait for promised reinforcements, or he could attack and have the element of surprise. Brigadier Sen chose surprise, and on 7th November 1947, the Army of Independent India fought its first real battle at a place called Shalateng. The battle began with the 1 Sikh Regiment engaging the enemy from their defensive positions in the front, while the Pakistani attackers were held by the fire of the 1 Sikh Regiment. 2 armoured cars and the rifle troop of the 7th Indian Light Cavalry stealthily made their way behind the enemy and got into position behind the attackers. The 1 Kamau Regiment also held their fire as they advanced unnoticed on the right flank of the Pathans. Then, as soon as the armoured trucks were in position, the Indians attacked in strength. Every Indian gun and mortar fired in unison. The raiders were caught in a horrendous crossfire. The Indian defensive positions firing from the front, machine guns from armoured cars to their rear, and a flanking attack by 1 Kamau. The raiders started fleeing in panic, leaving behind all their dead. The 1 Sikh chased them all the way to Patan. The enemy left behind 472 dead on the battlefield, and another 146 bodies were found on the way to Baramulla. After the Battle of Shalateng, the raiders did not stop running till they reached Pakistan. Pakistan did everything by stealth. The Pakistan government first halted traffic on the only rail line going into Kashmir, then confiscated Kashmiri trucks, and finally blocked import of all food grains, salt, sugar, petrol, kerosene into Kashmir. And when the blockade did not achieve the desired result, the Pakistani leadership prepared a plan which promised a swift resolution, yet kept the risk of open conflict with India at a minimum. And that plan very nearly succeeded. It was a devious plan that Pakistan hatched. Pathan tribal militias from the northwest frontier province were to be unleashed in Kashmir. Every Pathan tribe was instructed to raise 1,000 men who were ferried on trucks requisitioned by the government of Pakistan. The raiders were assembled at Batrasi, northeast of Abbottabad, where they were provided with arms, ammunition, and vehicles. The Pathans were warlike, but they were not familiar with the principles of modern tactics and military discipline. So every raider group had regulars from the Pakistan Army to operate the communications equipment and provide tactical advice. The invasion was to commence on the 20th of October 1947. The main northern tribal force was to invade Kashmir on the Abbottabad, Gadi Habibullah, Muzaffarabad, Srinagar axis, with a smaller auxiliary force advancing along the Muri, Kohala, Muzaffarabad axis. On the night of 20-21 October, 2,000 Pathans captured the bridge spanning the Neelam River on the road linking Muzaffarabad with Abbottabad. It was all done without a fight because the all-Muslim Guard platoon of the 4 Jammu Kashmir State Infantry had joined the tribesmen.
Kashmir forces, some of the battalions which had Muslim majority, especially in the northern areas, they revolted against the Maharaja's rule, and that revolt was led by their own officer, who was a Britisher.
By the time the Indian Army arrived to defend Kashmir, local resistance groups had started forming, ready to fight against Pakistan and their Pathan proxy. Soon, there were multiple forces at war across the state. The Indian Army, the Pakistani Army in disguise, the state forces of Jammu and Kashmir, the Pathan raiders, the local militias aligned to Pakistan, and the anti-Pakistan resistance organized by the National Conference. In fact, the entire war of 1947-48 was waged over an area of 89,000 square kilometers. The raiders reached Baramulla on 26 October and went on an orgy of looting and killing. When Baramulla fell, a dejected Maharaja Hari Singh of Kashmir signed the instrument of accession and left for Jammu. After the victory of Shalateng, the Indian Army liberated Baramulla on the 8th of November and Uri on the 13th. When winter set in, the intensity of operations decreased, but India continued its build-up in Kashmir. By March 1948, there were 5 brigades in the state ready to launch the summer offensive to clear Kashmir of all Pakistani infiltrators. In February 1948, the Pakistani militia began Operation Hammer. Their objective was to take Skardu, seize Kargil, occupy the Zojila Pass, and finally capture Leh in Ladakh. At this time, the Leh garrison consisted of a single rifle platoon of 33 men. But at the very last moment, reinforcements arrived when 40 volunteers carrying an extra rifle each crossed the difficult Zoji Pass in midwinter and joined the defenders. With the extra rifles, they armed a locally raised militia and also built an emergency airstrip for the Indian Air Force to land their planes. The Pakistani forces surrounded and besieged Kargil, Dras and Skardu. On May the 10th, they ambushed and destroyed 2 Indian battalions who had been sent to relieve Skardu. On May the 22nd, the Pakistanis seized Kargil and Dras fell on June 11th, 1948.
Firstly, we didn't have sufficient forces, and secondly, this road access had been blocked by the Pakistanis. So there is no way we could have gone to Skardu and reinforce that.
But India's Skardu garrison held out in the old Kharpocho fort for over 6 months, but finally had to surrender when it ran out of food and ammunition. The defenders were all massacred, along with all the Hindu and Sikh civilians who had taken refuge in the fort. When Skardu fell on 14th August 1948, the way to Leh opened up for the Pakistani raiders.
We've got to stop this, and we will stop it. We must link up with Leh as soon as possible through Jersey Pass, Dras and Kargil.
The Leh garrison had only a company of regulars and 150-odd militiamen facing the Pakistanis. But on August 23rd, the Indian Air Force, in extremely bad weather, flew in a Gurkha battalion which beat back the Pakistani attack. The first Indian attempt to retake Kargil and Dras failed. To reach both these places, the Indian forces had to cross the Zojila Pass that was held in strength by the Pakistani forces.
Zojila is a critical pass because it's one of the lowest Himalayan passes which offers access into Ladakh. All the other passes, Potla, Mangla, they're 17,000 feet high. Zojila is 10,800, 11,000 feet.
The terrain favored the defender. There was no vegetation to conceal troop movements. And the Pakistani positions on the steep mountain slopes were impossible to hit, either from the air or by the direct fire of the attacking infantry. The gallantry of the Indian troops, or so it seemed, was not enough to take the Zojila Pass. To break through the pass, Major General Thimaia had the armor squadron of the 7th Light Cavalry brought up from the south. The squadron was moved to Sonmarg in secret. The turrets of the tanks were dismounted and transported on trucks under canvas. The convoy moved only at night, and when it arrived in Srinagar, the city was placed under curfew.
You see, Kashmir at that time was full of fifth columnists and enemy agents. So to get the tanks there without anybody catching on that the Indians were bringing tanks in was the first big thing, and that was a dramatic thing that they disassembled them, brought them up and reassembled them at Baltal. Now from Baltal there had been for centuries a mule track up to the Zojila. So in a short space of 2 months to build a road, which it's called the Thangaraju road, so that was an incredible feat in itself.
Pakistani intelligence remained unaware of these movements and preparations. So when, on November the 1st, 1948, an armored squadron suddenly appeared at the 11,575 feet high Zojila Pass, the Pakistanis were stunned. They had not dreamt of seeing tanks at such an altitude and in such difficult terrain. They had no anti-tank weapons, and their small arms and mortar fire were of no use against the tanks. The tanks began to fire directly at the Pakistani bunkers that the artillery and airstrikes had not been able to hit. The Pakistani forces were thrown out of Zojila, and the Indian Army went on to retake Dras and Kargil. On the 24th of November, they linked up with the Gurkha regiment advancing from Leh and secured the entire axis. By the end of 1948, India was in a totally commanding position. The Indian Army was now ready to crush the Pakistani army and take back the rest of Kashmir. Pakistan was losing everywhere and had no resources in reserve. India was close to complete victory when, in November 1948, the Nehru government suddenly requested the United Nations to mediate to resolve the conflict. After some last-minute negotiations, a ceasefire came into effect on January the 1st, 1949, and the problem of Kashmir remained to fester into the future. Alas, that's all we have time for now. I'm Kabir Bedi, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again on another episode of Guns and Glory.